Good evening, Who Dey Nation, and Running Through the Jungle family. I'm your host, Tim Lyons. I'll provide a quick recap from Week 8 of the Bengals game. For all you fantasy football enthusiasts, I'll also cover the top 5 fantasy point getters from this week. Now, to the recap versus the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles soared to a 37-17 victory over the Cincinnati Bengals. Here are some key highlights from the game. Jalen Hurts had an outstanding performance, scoring 4 touchdowns, 3 rushing and 1 passing touchdown. Saquon Barkley rushed for over 100 yards, contributing significantly to the Eagles' offense. The Eagles' defense was solid, forcing 2 turnovers from the Bengals. Joe Burrow and the Bengals started strong with a 17-play, 70-yard drive ending in a touchdown, but struggled in the second half. The Eagles scored on all 5 of their second-half possessions, showcasing their offensive prowess. The Eagles improved their record to 5-2, while the Bengals pooped the bed once again to 3-5. Next up for the Cincinnati Bengals, the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. You want to hear our reactions to the games? Check out Roaring Reactions on YouTube or listen to all your favorite podcast platforms weekly. Also, join us on Wednesdays for Running Through the Jungle predictions and catch our Roaring Reactions either the day of the game or the day after the game to hear our reactions to our win or loss. Now I'm going to take a quick commercial break, and I'll be right back with you. Welcome back. Again, hi, I'm Tim from Running Through the Jungle. I'm going to start off the show a little bit differently today. Normally I just get into the stats of, Jalen Hurts had 35.4 points and so many yards and so many touchdowns, whatever. But today I'm actually going to start it off. I'm going to start it off differently. And this is thanks to NFL fantasy football. I'm going to start with the perfect lineup. So if you had the perfect lineup, you had Jalen Hurts as your quarterback with 35.14 points. James Cooks from the Buffalo Bills with 28.3 points. A-Chain from the Miami Dolphins with 26.7 points. Those are your 2 running backs. At wide receivers, you had CeeDee Lamb with 39.6 points. McConkey from the Los Angeles Chargers, I almost called them the Las Vegas Chargers, I don't know why, with 29.1 points. At tight end, Otten for Tampa Bay had 29.1 points. Cedric Tillman for the Cleveland Browns had 28.9 points. Chris Boswell, the scoring machine for the Pittsburgh Steelers, had 14 points. And the defense for the perfect lineup was the Detroit Lions with 16 points. If you had this perfect lineup, you had 246 points. And now to the I'm not so perfect lineup. If you're running Caleb Williams from Chicago, he had 9.34 points, Singletary for the New York Giants had 4.3 points. Nick Chubb only had 5.2 points as your running backs. Your wide receivers, Amari Cooper from the Buffalo Bills only had 1.3 points. Tyler Lockett only had 1.9 points. Freiermuth with a big 3.9 points. Pittman Jr. at flex, 2.6 points. And if you had the kicker from the Chicago Bears, he had 1 point. And then unfortunately for you people that ran the Cincinnati Bengals defense, they had -4 points, and it would have been a total score of 25.54 points, and you would have got laughed at on your fantasy league. Now to the point scorers for the week. At number 1, and starting with the quarterback, at number 1, Jalen Hurts. He had 263 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 37 rushing yards, and 3 touchdowns for 35.14 points. Bo Nix at number 2 versus Carolina had 284 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. He had 4 yards rushing and 1 rushing touchdown for 29.76 points. Kirk Cousins for Atlanta versus Tampa Bay had 276 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, and 16 rushing yards for 28.64 points. Brock Purdy at number 4 for San Francisco versus Dallas had 260 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 56 rushing yards, and 1 touchdown for 26 points. At number 5, Matthew Stafford versus Minnesota had 279 points, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, negative 4 yards rushing for 24.76 points. Now to your running backs. James Cook at number 1 had 111 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, 3 receptions for 22 yards for 28.30 points versus the Seattle Seahawks. Number 2, Devon Achane versus Arizona for Miami had 97 rushing yards, 6 receptions for 50 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 26.70 points. Josh Jacobs versus Jacksonville had 127 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 reception for negative 2 yards, 25.50 points versus Jacksonville. At number 4, I'm about calling Brian Robinson. That's Bijan Robinson versus Tampa Bay for Atlanta had 63 rushing yards, 7 receptions for 43 yards and 1 touchdown for 23.60 points. Ramondre Stevenson versus the New York Jets, 48 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. He had 3 receptions for 17 yards, and he had a 2-point conversion for 23.50 points. Now to your wide receivers. At number 1, CeeDee Lamb versus San Francisco had 13 receptions for 146 yards and 2 touchdowns for 39.60 points. Ladd McConkey versus New Orleans had 6 receptions for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns for 29.10 points. Cedric Tillman versus Baltimore for the Cleveland Browns had 7 receptions, 99 yards, 2 touchdowns for 28.90 points. The rookie Marvin Harrison Jr. versus Miami had 6 receptions for 111 yards and 1 touchdown for 23.10 points. Calvin Ridley, wow, I haven't called this guy's name in a while, versus Detroit had 3 rushing yards. He had 10 receptions for 143 yards and 1 fumble loss for 22.60 points. Now to the tight ends. Number 1, Cade Otton seems to be Baker Mayfield's number 1 target versus Atlanta had 9 receptions for 81 yards, 2 touchdowns for 29.10 points. Kyle Pitts for Atlanta versus Tampa Bay had 4 receptions for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns for 25.10 points. Travis Kelce, look at there, I'm actually reading his name for the first time, I believe, versus the Las Vegas Raiders had 10 receptions, 90 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown for 25 points. George Kittle versus Dallas had 6 receptions, 128 yards, and 1 touchdown for 24.80 points. At number 5, Trey McBride versus Miami had 9 receptions for 124 yards, totaling 21.40 points. Now to the kickers. As I said before, Chris Boswell had 2 PATs, made 4 field goals for 14 points. Anders Carlson versus Dallas had 3 PATs and 3 field goals for 14 points. Jake Elliott versus Cincinnati had 4 PATs and 3 field goals for 13 points. Jake Bates versus Tennessee had 7 PATs and 1 50-plus yarder for 12 points. And at number 5, Greg Joseph for the New York Giants versus Pittsburgh had 4 field goals for 12 points. And then to the defense, the Detroit Lions come in at number 1, had 1 sack, 2 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries, had 1 return for a touchdown, had allowed 14 points for 16 points. Pittsburgh Steelers versus the New York Giants had 4 sacks, 1 interception, 1 fumble recovery, and a return for a touchdown and only allowed 18 points, totaling 15 total points. Los Angeles Raiders, oh my goodness, I can't even comprehend what I'm reading here today. Los Angeles Chargers versus New Orleans had 5 sacks, only allowed 6 points for 12 fantasy points. At number 4 versus Indianapolis had 5 sacks, 1 interception, 1 fumble recovery, allowed 20 points for 10 total fantasy points. At number 5, the Buffalo Bills versus Seattle, 1 sack, 1 interception, 1 fumble recovery, allowed 10 points for 9 points. Now to close out my show, now I'm going to bring you up Week 9's waiver wire. Otten, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's only on 46.3% of leagues. Like I said earlier, but he's one of Baker's favorite targets. So you might want to look at picking him up if nobody has him on your league. Keon Coleman for the Buffalo Bills. He could be on the waiver wire. He's only starting in 53% of the fantasy leagues. Tillman for the Cleveland Browns is only rostered in 2.8% leagues. Matt Stafford, 49.5% leagues. Bo Nix at 16.9% of leagues. So those are some guys that you might want to look at maybe picking up off the waiver wire if they're available. They scored some good points this week and might be available. Now that wraps up the Dey Weekly. Again, my name is Tim. Thank you guys so much for joining me, for watching me, for liking, subscribing. Like I said, subscribe to Running Through the Jungle. Like and subscribe to my channel as well. And also listen to my podcast or this episode on all your podcast platforms. Have a great rest of your week in Dey.